All right, today let's come to hands and knees first. Actually, no, let's come to seated. I changed my mind. We're going to get into the feet to start. Some of you might be comfortable sitting down even on the ground, but if you want to prop the hips up, you can use a block, a bolster, a blanket, whatever you want. You just need access to your feet. So make sure, however you're seated, you can reach your feet. I prefer to sit cross-legged. Another good alternative is having one leg extended out in front of you, and you can just bring the foot on top of the thigh, and then you have access to your foot. So see what works for you. Grab on. You want the right foot in front of you. Grab onto the right foot. Bring it so that you can reach the toes. And we're doing our toe yoga. So you're taking your index finger into the space between the big toe and the second toe. And then you're weaving every finger between each toe as best you can. We all have different anatomy. Some of us have short toes, long toes, more space between the toes. So just work with what you have. And if you can't get your hands between all the toes, don't worry about it. Do what you can. So fingers are on the top of the foot and the palm of the hands on the sole of the foot. And now you can start to squeeze the foot and move it forward and back. So that movement comes from the elbow. You'll flare that in and out. And you're applying some pressure on the foot, just enough to kind of warm it up while you're moving it. We use our feet so much. So it's nice to kind of take a moment to give them a little bit of love. Thank them for all they do, getting us around. Okay, stop. Wiggle the fingers all the way down to the base of the toes as best you can, and then spread the fingers as wide as you can. So you're making some space on the top of the foot and the hands too. You're spreading the hands, you're getting some resistance from the foot at the same time. Grab onto the top of the foot. Same thing one more time. So flare the elbow in and out. And stop. Bring the fingers all the way down. Spread the hands as wide as you can. Take the fingers out from between the toes, extend the legs out in front of you. Take a peek, see if there's a difference between the right foot and the left foot. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. Might be color, definitely space between the toes, likely. Okay, so switching sides, bring the left foot in front of you. Maybe bring it up on top of the leg so you can reach it, and then start to bring the index finger between the big toe and the second toe and weave the rest of the fingers through as best you can. It might be different on this side. Once you get it, fingers are on the top of the foot, heel of the hand on the sole of the foot, and then start to move the top of the foot forward and back using your elbow to flare that out. And find a pause, wiggle the fingers down a little bit lower if you can, and then spread the fingers as wide as you can, spreading the toes as wide as you can. And this is one of those things, like if you do it every once in a while, you start being able to tell it, you can tell a difference each time you come into it. It's a little bit better. You don't want to go too far between each time you do it. Okay, grab onto the top of the foot and then move the foot forward and back. There's one regular student that I have that I teach in person. I did this with her once, and she does this on a regular basis, and even got her husband doing it, who doesn't really practice yoga, because they can feel a difference in their feet. She said she does it while she's watching TV sometimes. Okay, pause, bring the fingers all the way down to the base of the toes, spread the fingers wide. This is your last time doing this. And slide those fingers out, bring the hands back behind you, extend the legs out in front of you, check out the feet, see what they look like now. And now we'll come to hands and knees. So bend the knees, come to tabletop, hands and knees, and you'll bring the knees all the way together, inner edges of the feet all the way together. tuck the toes underneath you. Maybe have a block nearby. You might not need it. You'll start to walk the hands back. You're bringing the hips toward the heels. So maybe you just stay right here and this is enough. Maybe you can get the hands up to the thighs. If you're coming all the way in, the head comes right over the hips and the hips are on the heels. And then we always double check, especially if you have toes that'll do it, making sure the fourth and fifth toe are going straight forward. And so now you're bringing weight onto the feet. This can be a lot to work with. If your arms are available and you're not using them on the mat in front of you, reach the arms up overhead, bend the right elbow, grab for the right elbow, just starting to get into the shoulder. Also give you something to do with the upper body. Look forward, deep breaths in and out through the nose, up and down the back of the throat, especially here. Your feet need a little bit of extra attention internally, so you can send the breath there. Then reach the arms up, switch sides, bend the left elbow, grab onto the left elbow, keeping the chest lifted without puffing out the lowest front ribs. Gaze is still forward. Once you look down, the head starts to collapse, the chest starts to collapse. And reach the arms all the way up if they're free. Bring the hands down to the mat in front of you and untuck the toes. You can tap the tops of the feet on the mat. Okay, so next one, you'll probably need a block or two. So definitely have them available. Staying in hands and knees. Inner edges of the knees are touching. You widen the feet a little wider than hip width distance. Here's where you want to put maybe a block or two between the ankles. If you feel like you can go lower than that, you can always use a blanket, a pillow, a bolster, whatever you have. But you start to move the calf muscle out of the way so that your knees have plenty of space. Hips go on a block or two, and then you come up to seated. So your toes are pointing back. That's very important. Inner ankles are hugging in toward the block or whatever you have underneath you. Outer ankles are hugging in. So maybe you sit here and you realize I could probably bring the hips down a little bit lower. If that's the case, come forward, take away a block, maybe take the bottom block to the medium height, sit back on it, and you can do it that way. So you just keep going until you find the lowest place you can be for a longer hold without too much of a struggle. Your hips need to be flat on whatever's underneath you. Some people can get their hips all the way down to the mat between the feet. So you're not sitting on your feet at all. If that's you, great. You want to make sure the knees are still down on the mat. Sometimes they start to lift up when you bring the hips too low. That's another cue to lift the hips up. Knees are still touching as best we can. So you're in saddle pose. We're now opening up the feet in a different way, ankles, knees, hips, and then probably some of the muscles there too, quads and everything else. Hands can come to the thighs, sit up tall, close the eyes, keep the chest open. And if your shoulders are going forward, bring them back. So you feel like the shoulder blades, the bottom tips of the shoulder blades are lifting and spreading the chest, hugging the core in, hugging the lowest front ribs in, inhaling and exhaling in and out through the nose, up and down the back of the throat. So allowing the lower body to accept this pose and start to embrace it, right? It happens in stages. At first, there might be a little bit of resistance. Once you start adding the breath with the pose, maybe an embrace starts. The body starts to let go, be held by the pose. So you can stay right here. I'll give you another option. If you have a block on the lowest height underneath you, or you're lower than that, this could be a great option. If you're higher than that, just stay where you are, keep the body upright. If you want to take it further, you could bring the hands back behind you and start to recline back. So that's certainly deeper. Tail's going forward toward the knees. You don't want it to go back toward the back of the mat. And you can stay looking forward. And then notice what's changed here. So maybe you're feeling a deeper opening in the top of the foot, ankles, knees. Make sure the knees aren't lifting away from the mat. They're still pressing down. Knees and inner thighs are still together. And if you have the hands back behind you, start to walk them forward, coming back up to where we started. So head right over the hips. Then bring the hands down in front of you. Whatever you have underneath the hips, set it off to the side. Bring the feet over to one side and extend the legs out in front of you. So this should feel nice. The legs have been bent every which way. You're going to keep the legs straight. Maybe you shift side to side so you feel like the hips or the sit bones are even on the mat. Reach the arms all the way up. Take an inhale. On the exhale, forward fold, coming into caterpillar. So just a seated forward fold. Rest the hands on something. Could be the legs, mat. You could even use the blocks outside the feet, or you could put a block between the legs and rest the forehead down onto the block if it easily reaches, or you can stack blocks, whatever you want to do. So seated forward fold. Let those legs start to open. Backside of the body open. And start to bring yourself back up to seated. If you're using any props, set those off to the side. You'll want a bolster or maybe some folded towels or blankets. Something about this size, could be a pillow too. Bring the bolster the wide way in front of you, and then bring the feet over the bolster. So the bolster's underneath the knees. Hips are down and feet are down on the mat in front of the bolster. Come on down onto your back. So you're lying down. Arms can be down by the sides. Feet stay on the mat, but bring the soles of the feet together and the knees wide. So when you open up the legs, the knees and outer thighs are resting on the bolster underneath you. And if you don't have a bolster, you can do this without a bolster. Just bring the feet in closer to the body. So some of us will stay right here if we're using the bolster. Some of us might be able to get a little deeper into the pose, and all you do is bring the feet up on top of the bolster. And that's definitely deeper. You can start here, see how it feels. And if it becomes too deep, too fast, just bring the feet forward and keep the shape of the legs. We haven't had any external hip openings yet, so this one might feel really good, especially after getting into the feet, ankles, and knees and getting deeper into the hips now. Now you're adding the inner thigh, groin area, outer hips. And we're finally reclined, lying on our backs. If you have the soles of the feet elevated on a bolster, start to bring the feet forward onto the mat. So keep the shape of the legs. You're just lowering the feet, feeling the difference between the two. So still in a hip opening, but it's a little bit softer than where you were. Now extend the legs forward. So legs are more straight, knees are still elevated with the bolster. And now there's a different release that happens in the hips, the legs, after you've had them opening out wide with the soles of the feet together. So enjoy that. Start to walk the feet in, soles of the feet to the mat. Roll over to your right side. Use the hands to bring yourself up to seated. You'll take this bolster and now you'll move it behind you. So it'll be the long way behind you. If you have a bolster and a blanket, this could be really nice. You could take the blanket. So you want the blanket to be like a square, and then you can fold it once in half. So now it's more of a rectangle and it just gives you a little bit more height. Bring that to the back of the bolster. That's just to elevate your head a little bit. If you don't have it, it's fine. Another option is you could put a block underneath the bolster and that'll elevate the back of the bolster. So once you get that going, start to cross the legs. So you're coming to a cross-legged seat or square. Ideally crossing at mid shin. So see if you can tighten it up and bring the feet and the knees in line. And then look at the toes. You want them to point straight forward. So the feet are flexed. That's great for the knees. Make sure you're even on the hips. The bolster isn't right up against the hips. There's a little bit of space there between you and the bolster. And then bring the hands back behind you. Lift the chest. So hug the belly and lift the chest. And then start to push the tail forward. Slowly lie down onto the bolster, keeping the legs in the same shape. If you need to adjust the blanket so it supports the curve of the neck and the head, move it around until you get it into the right spot. Arms can be down by the sides. If the legs loosened up and you feel like you could go tighter, do that. But you're uh lying back in Supta Sukhasana. So Sukhasana is square pose, Supta means reclined, lying on your back. Bring the hands to the rib cage and notice if one side of the rib cage is higher than the other. If they're even, great. If one side's higher than the other, what do you need to do to level it off? Sometimes when we lie down, we don't lie down flat or we just don't end up on the bolster evenly. You may need to come up and try it again. Some of us just need to lean a little bit more over to one side than the other. So once you feel secure about having the rib cage even, then you can bring the arms down by the sides, let the palms turn up, maybe close the eyes or soften the gaze. And there are two ways to switch the crossing of the legs. Some of you can easily just stay down on your back and bring the other leg in front, crossing the shins, trying to bring the feet underneath the knees, keeping the toes pointing forward. Some of you are going to need to come up and make the switch happen. But you do want a tighter fold of the legs, one you can stay in for a few minutes without thinking about it too much. If you had to get up to make that transition, might be a good idea to bring the hands on the rib cage. Just check that out, see if you're still even. If not, make some adjustments. And you'll start to unwind the legs. You can just let the legs extend out in front of you. Give them a break. Keep resting on the bolster. Eyes can stay closed. Start to walk the feet in, bending the knees. Roll over to your right side. Use the hands to bring yourself up. Let's just set these props off to the side. So blanket and bolster will go off to the side. Keeping the props on the sides of the mat is a nice place because they're easily reachable. I kind of move them out of the way so you can still see me, just so you know. Okay, so this next one, let's have blocks nearby. Probably only one block, so you're fine if you only have the one. Just put it next to the hips. Feet on the mat, come on down onto your back. Keep the soles of the feet on the mat. Just walk them in a little bit so that the heels are underneath the knees. Press into the feet, lift the hips up, slide a block on the lowest height underneath the hips. So coming into a supported bridge pose, but we're just elevating the hips a little bit. We can take it further the longer we're in this if we want to. Several options along the way with this one. So just start here. You're welcome to stay here the whole time and skip any options, especially if this is just feeling like right where you should be. So know that it's always a choice. But you're coming into another back bend. So that last one, when you're reclined back, if you had something elevating the torso, the head, that was a back bend, probably a bolster and a blanket. But if you were lying on the ground doing it, that's fine too. You just didn't get the back bend. Maybe you are now with something underneath the hips. And if you're on the block on the lowest height and you feel like, you know what, I could go up higher, press into the feet, lift the hips up, take the block to the medium height, the wide way, right underneath the hips. Your lower back's always free and your supported bridge. Tail still going up between the knees. Chest is lifting and spreading. Maybe you get those shoulder blades underneath you a little bit more on the outer upper arms, pressing down into the mat or ground underneath you. Knees still pointing forward. Sometimes when we get relaxed, the knees start to splay out. Try to keep the knees and the toes going straight forward for better alignment. And if you like, you can keep the soles of the feet down on the mat, or you could play with lifting one leg up. And it's nice to do one leg at a time because then you can feel if the block's right where it needs to be and you feel fully supported with the hips. If you do bring the other leg up, legs can be relaxed. You just want the feet to be over the hips. Chest is still lifted. And now you're reversing the blood flow in the body. And if you have the legs up, start to bend the knees, bring the feet back down to the mat. See if you can feel a difference. Do you feel the blood going back into the feet? Press into the feet, lift the hips up, bring that block to the lowest height if it's on the medium height. So we all have the block on the lowest height. Rest the hips on the block. Then one other thing we can do with this. So extend the right leg forward, but bring the heel all the way down so it's resting down on the mat. Toes can turn up. You'll feel a nice opening at the top of the right hip, probably. Stay here, or if it doesn't feel like it's too much, extend the left leg, and now you have both legs out. If that's too much, you can just do one leg at a time. You don't have to stay here. Legs can be relaxed. Chest is still lifting and spreading. Try to keep the tail going forward toward the heels. If you're doing one leg at a time, switch sides. And if the feet are extended out in front of you, one or both, bring them back in, soles of the feet to the mat. You're back in your supported bridge pose. Notice the change, how your whole spine completely changes just by the shape of the legs. Press into the feet, lift the hips up, slide the block out from underneath you, bring the hips back down onto the mat. It never feels like you're going up that high when you first come into it. It's always the way back down when you start feeling that difference between each height. Hug the right knee in toward the chest. Leave that left foot on the mat. Sometimes it's tempting to extend it out, but that's a little bit much for the lower back when you're coming out of a back bend, especially a longer hold like the one we just did. Switch sides, right foot comes down, left knee comes in. Left foot comes down to the mat. So this next one, you'll stay on your back. You'll want a bolster or a block on the left side of your body. If you're using a bolster, it's going to go the long way down by the hips and legs. Few options. So you can start with pressing into the feet, scooting the hips over to the right, bring the knees on top of the bolster. So outer edge of that left foot is down on the ground, knees are up on the bolster, right foot's just stacked on top of the inner left foot. And then reach the right arm out to the side. You can look over the right shoulder. Ideally, the right shoulder's on the mat. So if it's not, that means the knees need to come up higher. So that's when you can bring the bolster in closer to lift the knees up. If you can easily get that right shoulder on the mat and you want to go deeper into the twist, you can start to move the bolster away from you. Another option is bringing the knees and the feet up on top of the bolster. You can do it that way. And for a deeper variation, if you feel like you need more, you could bring the bolster between the knees. And that way, the outer left leg is completely on the floor and the right shoulder's on the floor. So, see where your twist is, soften it up as much as you need to, especially if you have something going on in the body. Could even be the shoulders. Sometimes there's something going on with one or both shoulders. A twist can be a lot to ask, or the lower back if there's lower back pain. So find a twist that's comfortable for you. It might be slight, just a tiny twist. It doesn't need to be the biggest one. For those of you that are feeling really good in the twist, take it where you want it to go, still keeping it easy no matter how you're feeling. Start to bring the gaze back up. Slowly unwind, bringing the feet back down onto the mat. We'll counter pose before we go over to the other side. So bring the knees in toward the chest. Keep the knees and the feet together. Slow circles with the knees, guiding them with the hands. And switch the direction, go the other way. Let's set the feet back down onto the mat. Whatever you have on the left side, bring it over to the right side, down by the hips and lower body. Press into the feet. We scoot the hips over to the left so we can stack the hips when we bring the knees over to the right. So you want this left hip to be right on top of the right hip. So you might need to make some adjustments there. Left arm is back behind you. Both shoulders on the mat if we can't. Lift the knees up, elevate them with props as much as you need to get that shoulder down on the mat if it's having it. If it's too much, don't worry about it. Another option too is bringing that left arm down by the side, especially if there's any issues with the shoulders, your twists. So get yourself set up. Find a twist that's working for you today. Close the eyes. Maybe look to the left. You can always look to the right. You can look up. The head can go any direction in your twist. When you look to the left and the knees are going to the right, that's the deepest variation. You're bringing the all the way to the cervical spine for the neck. If you have the gaze going over to the left, start to bring it back to center. Set the props or whatever you're using off. Bring the feet back onto the mat, finding center on your back. Bring the knees in toward the chest. Go the other way with your circles, knees and feet together. So whichever way you don't want to start first, that doesn't feel like the natural way you want to go. then switch the direction, go the other way. Set the feet back down onto the mat. Roll over to your right side. Use the hands to bring you up to seated, and we'll come to hands and knees. Take your time getting there. It's a bigger transition. We're coming into child's pose. So I'll give you a couple options with child's pose. If you want, you could use the bolster, just bring it the long way, and it's just barely between the knees. You can come on down, turn the head to one side, and rest this way. If you want more of an upper body shoulder opening, skip the bolster. Bring blocks out in front of you for your hands, so about shoulder width distance apart. Just the lowest height is probably fine. Hands go up on top of the blocks, forehead comes down to the mat, and you can do child's pose this way. If it's too much for the shoulders, skip it. If you don't have any props, just do your traditional child's pose. Hands on the mat, out in front of you, forehead down. The hips go back toward the heels unless the knees need more space. Keep the hips lifted until the knees are silent. Tops of the feet are on the mat, pointing back. Big toes touch. And even here, you're getting an opening on the top of the foot, ankles, knees, and hips. And you'll start to lift the head up, bringing the hands down to the mat, coming back to hands and knees. If you have any props in front of you, set those off to the side. Once you get to hands and knees, stack the shoulders over the wrists, hips over the knees. Do some cat-cow real slow. So some dynamic movement before we head into Shavasana, rounding the spine, arching the spine with the breath, inhaling forward, exhaling back. It's funny how in our yin practice, we hold these poses so long in stillness, and then it's the dynamic movement we're using as our counters. And then in our flow class, we're moving And we use the yin poses as our counters. And finish the cycle that you're on, forward and back. Coming back to tabletop neutral spine, bring the feet over to one side, find a seat on your mat, legs out in front of you. You can do a traditional Shavasana just lying down flat on your mat, or you can bring the legs out in front of you, bring the bolster back behind you, take the blocks, bring those to the side, and then soles of the feet onto the mat. Take the blocks on the lowest height, the wide way underneath the thighs. So when you lie down onto your back, bolsters underneath the neck and the head. Get that right in position. And then you can extend the legs out. So feet are wider than hip width distance. You want the blocks to elevate the thighs. So you might need to move them around a little bit with the feet and the legs or the hands. Toes can turn out, arms down by the sides. And then this just sets the body up a little bit different for your final relaxation pose. Take a deeper breath in through the nose. As long as you can, back out through the nose. Keep pushing the air out through the nose. Get it all out. Now let the body go back to breathing on its own. So no breath control, just your regular breath. You can even watch it as you stay in stillness, making any observations, being curious about what your body does without you even trying, without you even thinking about it or putting any effort into it. And we'll start to find some small movements in the hands and the feet. Walk the feet in, bending the knees. And if you're using the blocks, just move those out of the way. You can use the feet or the hands to set them off to the side. We'll roll over to our right side. You can keep your head on the bolster if you're using one. Use the hands. Bring yourself up to a comfortable seat. Head is the last to come up. Sit even on your sit bones. Hands can come to rest on the thighs or the knees. Sitting up tall. Bring the hands together in front of you. Slight bow of the head. Take a moment, honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, as well as everyone around you. Bring the head back up. Blink open the eyes. Namaste. Thanks for sharing your practice. Hope it was a good one. I'll see you next time.